Praise to Buddha. All are one with Buddha. All awake to Buddha. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, eternal, joyous, selfless, pure. Through the day, Kanzeon, through the night, Kanzeon. This moment arises from mind. This moment itself is mind.
Lotus Sutra, Chapter 1, Introduction.
This is what I heard. At one time the Buddha was in Rajagriha, staying on Mount Gridhrakuta. Accompanying him were a multitude of leading monks numbering 12,000 persons. All were arhats whose outflows had come to an end, who had no more earthly desires, who had attained what was to their advantage and had put an end to the bonds of existence, and whose minds had achieved a state of freedom. Their names were Ajnata, Kaundinya, Mahakasyapa, Uruvilvakashyapa, Gayakashyapa, Nadikashyapa, Shariputra, Great Madgalyayana, Mahakatyayana, Aniruddha, Kafina, Gavampati, Ravata, Pilindavatsa, Bakula, Maha Kaustila, Nanda, Sundarananda, Purna, Maitrayani Putra, Subhuti, Ananda, and Rahula. All were like these great arhats who were well known to others. There were also 2,000 persons, some of whom were still learning, and some who had completed their learning. There was the nun Mahaprajapati with her 6,000 followers, and there was Rahula's mother, the nun Yasodhara, with her followers. There were bodhisattvas and mahasattvas, 80,000 of them, none of them ever regressing in their search for Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. All had gained dharanis, delighted in preaching, were elegant and turned the wheel of the law that knows no regression. They had made offerings to immeasurable hundreds and thousands of Buddhas, in the presence of various Buddhas, had planted numerous roots of virtue, had been constantly praised by the Buddhas, had trained themselves in compassion, were good at entering the Buddha wisdom, and had fully penetrated the great wisdom and reached the farther shore. Their fame had spread throughout immeasurable worlds, and they were able to save countless hundreds of thousands of living beings. Their names were Bodhisattva Manjusri, Bodhisattva perceiver of the world sounds, Bodhisattva gainer of great authority, Bodhisattva constant exertion, Bodhisattva never resting, Bodhisattva jeweled palm, Bodhisattva medicine king, Bodhisattva brave donor, Bodhisattva jeweled moon, Bodhisattva moonlight, Bodhisattva full moon, Bodhisattva great strength, Bodhisattva immeasurable strength, Bodhisattva transcending the threefold world, Bodhisattva Bhadrapala, Bodhisattva Maitreya, Bodhisattva jeweled accumulation, and Bodhisattva guiding leader. Bodhisattvas and mahasattvas such as these, numbering 80,000, were in attendance. At that time Shakra Devanamindra with his followers, 20,000 sons of gods, also attended. There were also the sons of God's rare moon, pervading fragrance, jeweled glow, and the 4 great heavenly kings, along with their followers, 10,000 sons of gods. Present were the sons of God's freedom and great freedom, and their followers, 30,000 sons of gods. Present were King Brahma, Lord of the Saha world, the great Brahma Sikhin, and the great Brahma light, bright, and their followers, 12,000 sons of gods. There were 8 dragon kings: the dragon king Nanda, the dragon king Upananda, the dragon king Sagara, the dragon king Vasuki, the dragon king Takshaka, the dragon king Anavatapta, the dragon king Manasvin, the dragon king Utpalaka, each with several hundreds of thousands of followers. There were 4 Kimnara kings: the Kimnara king Law, the Kimnara king Wonderful Law, the Kimnara king Great Law, the Kimnara king Upholding the Law, each with several hundreds of thousands of followers. There were 4 Gandharva kings: the Gandharva king Pleasant, the Gandharva king Pleasant Sound, the Gandharva king Beautiful, and the Gandharva king Beautiful Sound, each with several hundreds of thousands of followers. There were 4 Asura kings: the Asura king Balan, the Asura king Karaskanda, the Asura king Vemachitrin, the Asura king Rahu, each with several hundreds of thousands of followers. There were 4 Garuda kings: the Garuda king Great Majesty, the Garuda king Great Body, the Garuda king Great Fullness, and the Garuda king As One Wishes, each with several hundreds of thousands of followers. And there was King Ajatasattu, the son of Vaidehi, with several hundreds of thousands of followers. Each of these, after bowing in obeisance before the Buddha's feet, withdrew and took a seat to one side. At that time the world-honored one, surrounded by the 4 kinds of believers, received offerings and tokens of respect, and was honored and praised, and for the sake of the Bodhisattvas he preached the great Vehicle Sutra, entitled Immeasurable Meanings, a law to instruct the Bodhisattvas, one that is guarded and kept in mind by the Buddhas. When the Buddha had finished preaching the sutra, he sat with his legs crossed in lotus position and entered into the samadhi of the place of immeasurable meanings, his body and mind never moving. At that time heaven rained down Mandarava flowers, great Mandarava flowers, Manjushaka flowers, and great Manjushaka flowers, scattering them over the Buddha and over the great assembly, and everywhere the Buddha world quaked and trembled in 6 different ways. At that time the monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen, heavenly beings, dragons, yakshas, gandharvas, asuras, garudas, kimnaras, mahoragas, human and non-human beings in the assembly, as well as the petty kings and wheel-turning sage kings, all those in the great assembly, having gained what they had never had before, were filled with joy, and pressing their palms together, gazed at the Buddha with a single mind. At that time the Buddha emitted a ray of light from the tuft of white hair between his eyebrows, one of his characteristic features, lighting up the 18,000 worlds in the eastern direction. There was no place that the light did not penetrate, reaching downward as far as the Avici hell, and upward to the Akanistha heaven. From this world one could see the living beings in the 6 paths of existence. In all of those other lands, one could likewise see the Buddhas present at that time in those other lands, and could hear the sutra teachings which those Buddhas were expounding. At the same time one could see monks, nuns, laymen and laywomen who had carried out religious practices and attained the way. One could also see the bodhisattvas and mahasattvas who through various causes and conditions, and various types of faith and understanding, and in various forms and aspects, were carrying out the way of the bodhisattva. And one could also see the Buddhas who had entered parinirvana, and could also see how after the Buddhas had entered parinirvana, towers adorned with the 7 treasures were erected for the Buddha relics. At that time Bodhisattva Maitreya had this thought: now the world-honored one has manifested these miraculous signs. But what is the cause of these auspicious portents? Now the Buddha, the world-honored one, has entered into samadhi. An unfathomable event such as this is seldom to be met with. With whom shall I question about this? Who can give me an answer? And again he had this thought: this Manjusri, son of a Dharma king, has already personally attended and given offerings to immeasurable numbers of Buddhas in the past. Surely he must see these rare signs. I will now question him. At this time the monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen, as well as the heavenly beings, dragons, spirits, and the others, all had this thought: this beam of brightness from the Buddha, these signs of transcendental powers, now whom shall we question about them? At that time the Bodhisattva Maitreya wished to settle his doubts concerning the matter, and in addition he could see what was in the minds of the 4 kinds of believers, the monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen, as well as the heavenly beings, dragons, spirits, and the others who made up the assembly. So he questioned Manjushri, saying: What is the cause of these auspicious portents, these signs of transcendental powers, this emitting of a great beam of brightness that illumines the 18,000 lands in the eastern direction, so we can see all the adornments of the Buddha worlds there? Then Bodhisattva Maitreya, wishing to state his meaning once more, asked the question in verse form. Manjushri, why from the white tuft between the eyebrows of our leader and teacher does this great light shine all around? Why do Mandarava and Manjushaka flowers rain down, and breezes scented with sandalwood delight the hearts of the assembly? Because of these the earth is everywhere adorned and purified, and this world quakes and trembles in 6 different ways. At this time, the 4 kinds of believers are all filled with joy and delight. They rejoice in body and mind, having gained what they never had before. This beam of brightness from between the eyebrows illumines the eastern direction, and 18,000 lands are all the color of gold. From the Avicii hell upward to the summit of being, throughout the various worlds, living beings in the 6 paths, the realm to which their births and deaths are tending, their good and bad deeds, and the pleasing or ugly recompense they receive. All of these can be seen from here. We can also see Buddhas, those sage lords, expounding and preaching sutras that are subtle, wonderful, and foremost. Their voices are clear and pure, issuing in soft and gentle sounds as they instruct the bodhisattvas in numberless millions. Their Brahma sounds are profound and wonderful, making living beings delight in hearing them. Each in his own world preaches the correct law, following various causes and conditions, employing immeasurable similes, illuminating the law of the Buddhas, guiding living beings to enlightenment. If a person should encounter troubles, loathing old age, sickness, and death, the Buddhas preach to him on nirvana, explaining how he may put an end to all troubles. If a person should have good fortune, having in the past made offerings to the Buddhas, determined to seek a superior way, the Buddhas preach the way of the Pratyeka Buddha. If there should be Buddha sons who carry out various religious practices, seeking to attain the unsurpassed wisdom, the Buddhas preach the way of purity. Manjusri, I have been dwelling here, seeing and hearing in this manner many things numbering in the thousands of millions. Numerous as they are, I will now speak of them in brief. I see in these lands bodhisattvas as numerous as Ganges sands, according with causes and conditions, seeking the way of the Buddha. Some of them give alms. Gold, silver, coral, pearls, mani jewels, seashell, agate, diamonds, and other such rarities. Men and women servants, carriages, jeweled hand carriages, and palanquins, gladly presenting these donations. Such gifts they give to the Buddha way, desiring to achieve the vehicle that is foremost in the threefold world and praised by the Buddhas. There are some bodhisattvas who give jeweled carriages drawn by teams of 4, with railings and flowered canopies adorning their top and sides. Or I see bodhisattvas who give their own flesh, hands and feet, or wives and children, as they seek the unsurpassed way. Or I see bodhisattvas who happily give heads, eyes, bodies, and limbs in their search for the Buddha wisdom. Manjusri, I see kings going to visit the place of the Buddha to question him about the unsurpassed way. They put aside their happy lands, their palaces, their men and women attendants, shave their hair and beard and don the clothes of the Dharma. Or I see bodhisattvas who become monks, living alone in quietude, delighting in chanting the sutras. Again I see bodhisattvas, bravely and vigorously exerting themselves, entering the deep mountains, their thoughts on the Buddha way, removing themselves from desire, constantly dwelling in emptiness and stillness, advancing deep in the practice of meditation till they have gained the 5 transcendental powers. And I see bodhisattvas resting in meditation, their palms pressed together, with 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000 verses praising the King of the Doctrines. And I see bodhisattvas, profound in wisdom, firm in purpose, who know how to question the Buddhas and accept and abide by all they hear. I see Buddha-sons proficient in both meditation and wisdom, who use immeasurable numbers of similes to expound the law to the assembly, who delight in preaching the law, converting the bodhisattvas, defeating the legions of the devil, and beating the Dharma drum. Or I see bodhisattvas, profoundly still and silent, honored by heavenly beings and dragons, yet not counting that a joy. And I see bodhisattvas living in forests emitting light, saving those who suffer in the hells, causing them to enter the Buddha way. And I see Buddha-sons who have never once slept, who keep circling the forest, diligently seeking the Buddha way. Or I see those who observe the precepts, no flaw in their conduct, as pure as jewels and gems, and in that manner seeking the Buddha way. And I see Buddha-sons abiding in the strength of fortitude, taking the abuse and blows of persons of overbearing arrogance, willing to suffer all of these, and in that manner seeking the Buddha way. I see bodhisattvas removing themselves from frivolity and laughter, and from foolish companions, befriending persons of wisdom, unifying their minds and ordering their thoughts in mountain and forest, for 1,000,000, 1,000, 10,000 years, in that manner seeking the Buddha way. Or I see bodhisattvas with delicious things to eat and drink, and 100 different kinds of medicinal potions, offering them to the Buddha and his monks. Fine robes and superior garments, robes costing in the thousands or 10,000s, or robes that are beyond cost, offering them to the Buddha and his monks.
1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000 jeweled dwellings made of sandalwood, and numerous wonderful articles of bedding, offering them to the Buddha and his monks.
Immaculate gardens and groves where flowers and fruit abound, flowing springs and bathing pools, offering them to the Buddha and his monks. Offerings such as these, of many different, wonderful varieties, presented gladly and without regret as they seek the unsurpassed way. Or there are bodhisattvas who expound the law of tranquil extinction, giving different types of instruction to numberless living beings. Or I see bodhisattvas viewing the nature of all phenomena as having no dual characteristics, as being like empty space. And I see Buddha-sons whose minds have no attachments, who use this wonderful wisdom to seek the unsurpassed way. Manjushri, there are also bodhisattvas who after the Buddha has passed into extinction make offerings to his relics. I see Buddha-sons building memorial towers numberless as Ganges sands. Jeweled towers lofty and wonderful 5,000 yohanas high, their width and depth exactly 2,000 yohanas, each with its 1,000 banners and streamers, with curtains laced with gems like dewdrops, and jeweled bells chiming harmoniously. There heavenly beings, dragons and spirits, human and non-human beings, with incense, flowers, and music, constantly make offerings. Manjushri, these Buddha-sons, in order to make offerings to the relics, adorn the memorial towers, so that just as it is, each land is as outstandingly wonderful as the heavenly king of trees when its flowers open and unfold. When the Buddha emits a beam of light, I and the other members of the assembly can see these lands in all of their outstanding wonders. The supernatural powers of the Buddhas and their wisdom are rare indeed. By emitting one pure beam of light, the Buddhas illuminate countless lands. I and the others have seen this, have gained something never known before. Buddha-san, Manjushri, I beg you to settle the doubts of the assembly. The 4 kinds of believers look up in happy anticipation, gazing at you and me. Why does the world-honored one emit this beam of brightness? Buddha-san, give a timely answer. Settle these doubts and occasion joy. What rich benefits will come from the projecting of this beam of brightness? It must be that the Buddha wishes to expound the wonderful law he gained when he sat in the place of practice. He must have prophecies to bestow. He has shown us Buddha lands with their adornment and purity of manifold treasures, and we have seen their Buddhas. This is not done for petty reasons. Manjushri, you must know. The 4 kinds of believers, the dragons and spirits, gaze at you and surmise, wondering what explanation you will give. At that time Manjushri said to the Bodhisattva and Mahasattva Maitreya and the other great men, "Good men, I suppose that the Buddha, the world-honored one, wishes now to expound the great law, to rain down the rain of the great law, to blow the conch of the great law, to beat the drum of the great law, to elucidate the meaning of the great law. Good men, in the past I have seen this auspicious portent among the Buddhas. They emitted a beam of light like this, and after that they expounded a great law. Therefore we should know that now, when the present Buddha manifests this light, he will do likewise. He wishes to cause all living beings to hear and understand the law, which is difficult for all the world to believe. Therefore he has manifested this auspicious portent. Good men, once at a time that was an immeasurable, boundless, inconceivable number of Asamkhaya kalpas in the past, there was a Buddha named Sun Moon Bright, thus come one, worthy of offerings of right and universal knowledge, perfect clarity and conduct well gone, understanding the world, unexcelled worthy trainer of people, teacher of heavenly and human beings, Buddha, world-honored one, who expounded the correct law. His exposition was good at the beginning, good in the middle, good at the end. The meaning was profound and far-reaching. The words were skillful and wondrous. It was pure and without alloy, complete, clean, and spotless, and bore the marks of Brahma practice. For the sake of those seeking to become voice-hearers, he responded by expounding the law of the Four Noble Truths, so that they could transcend birth, old age, sickness, and death, and attain nirvana. For the sake of those seeking to become Pratyeka Buddhas, he responded by expounding the law of the 12-link chain of causation. For the sake of the Bodhisattvas, he responded by expounding the 6 paramitas, causing them to gain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, and to acquire the wisdom that embraces all species. Then there was another Buddha, who is also named Sun Moon Bright, and then another Buddha, also named Sun Moon Bright. There were 20,000 Buddhas like this, all with the same appellation, all named Sun Moon Bright, and all had the same surname, the surname Bharadvaja. Maitreya, you should understand that from the first Buddha to the last, all had the same appellation. All were named Sun Moon Bright. They were worthy of all the 10 epithets, and the law they expounded was good at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. The last Buddha, when he had not yet left family life, had 8 princely sons, the first named having intention, the second good intention, the third immeasurable intention, the fourth jeweled intention, the fifth increased intention, the sixth cleansed of doubt intention, the seventh echoing intention, the 8th law intention. Dignity and virtue came easily to them, and each presided over a 4-continent realm. When these princes heard that their father had left family life and had gained Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, they all cast aside their princely positions and followed him by leaving family life, conceiving a desire for the great vehicle. They constantly carried out Brahma practices, and all became teachers of the law. They had already planted good roots in the company of 1,000, 10,000 Buddhas. At that time, the Buddha Sun Moon Bright preached the Great Vehicle Sutra entitled Immeasurable Meanings, a law to instruct the Bodhisattvas, one that is guarded and kept in mind by the Buddhas. When he had finished preaching the sutra, he sat cross-legged in the midst of the great assembly and entered into the samadhi of the place of immeasurable meanings, his body and mind never moving. At this time heaven rained down Mandarava flowers, great Mandarava flowers, Manjushaka flowers, and great Manjushaka flowers, scattering them over the Buddha and over the great assembly, and everywhere the Buddha world quaked and trembled in 6 different ways. At that time the monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen, heavenly beings, dragons, yakshas, gandharvas, asuras, garudas, kimnaras, and mahoragas, the human and non-human beings in the assembly, as well as the petty kings, the wheel-turning sage kings, all those in this great assembly gained what they had never had before, and, filled with joy, pressed their palms together and gazed at the Buddha with a single mind. At that time the thus come one emitted a ray of light from the tuft of white hair between his eyebrows, one of his characteristic features, lighting up 18,000 Buddha lands in the eastern direction. There was no place that the light did not penetrate, just as you have seen it light up the Buddha lands now. Maitreya, you should understand this. At that time in the assembly there were 20 million bodhisattvas who were happy and eager to hear the law. When these bodhisattvas saw this beam of light that illumined the Buddha lands everywhere, they gained what they had never had before. They wished to know the causes and conditions that occasioned this light. At that time, there was a bodhisattva named Wonderfully Bright, who had 800 disciples. At this time, the Buddha Sun Moon Bright arose from his samadhi, and because of the bodhisattva Wonderfully Bright, preached the Great Vehicle Sutra, called the Lotus of the Wonderful Law, a law to instruct the bodhisattvas, one that is guarded and kept in mind by the Buddhas. For 60 small kalpas the Buddha remained in his seat without rising, and the listeners in the assembly at that time also remained seated there for 60 small kalpas, their bodies and minds never moving. And yet it seemed to them that they had been listening to the Buddha preach for no more than the space of a meal. At this time in the assembly there was not a single person who in body or mind had the least feeling of weariness. When the Buddha Sun Moon Bright had finished preaching this sutra, over a period of 60 small kalpas, he spoke these words to the Brahmas, devils, Shramanas, and Brahmins, as well as to the heavenly and human beings and asuras in the assembly, saying, "Tonight at midnight the thus come one will enter the nirvana of no remainder." At this time there was a bodhisattva named Virtue Storehouse. The Buddha Sun Moon Bright bestowed a prophecy on him, announcing to the monks, "This bodhisattva Virtue Storehouse will be the next to become a Buddha. He will be called Pure Body, Tathagata, Arhat, Samyak Sambuddha." After the Buddha had finished bestowing this prophecy at midnight, he entered the nirvana of no remainder. After the Buddha had passed away, Bodhisattva Wonderfully Bright upheld the Sutra of the Lotus of the Wonderful Law for a period of fully 80 small kalpas, expounding it for others. The 8 sons of the Buddha Sun Moon Bright all acknowledged Wonderfully Bright as their teacher. Wonderfully Bright taught and converted them and roused in them a firm determination to gain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Those princely sons gave offerings to immeasurable hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, millions of Buddhas, and after that all were able to achieve the Buddha way. The last to become a Buddha was named Buddha Burning Torch. Among the 800 disciples of Wonderfully Bright was one named Seeker of Fame. He was greedy for gain and support, and though he read and recited numerous sutras, he could not understand them, but for the most part forgot them. Hence he was called Seeker of Fame. Because this man had in addition planted various good roots, however, he was able to encounter immeasurable hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, millions of Buddhas, to make offerings to them, revere, honor, and praise them. Maitreya, you should understand this. Bodhisattva Wonderfully Bright who lived then, could he be unknown to you? He was no other than I myself, and Bodhisattva Seeker of Fame was you. Now, when I see these auspicious portents, it is no different from what I saw before. Therefore I suppose that now the Thus Come One is about to preach the great vehicle sutra called the Lotus of the Wonderful Law, a law to instruct the Bodhisattvas, one that is guarded and kept in mind by the Buddhas. At that time Manjushri, wishing in the presence of the great assembly to state his meaning once more, spoke in verse form, saying, "I recall that in a past age, immeasurable innumerable kalpas ago, there was a Buddha most honored of men named Sun Moon Bright. This world-honored one expounded the law, saving immeasurable living beings and numberless millions of bodhisattvas. The 8 princely sons whom this Buddha sired before taking leave of family life, when they saw the great sage had left his family, did likewise, carrying out Brahma practices. At that time the Buddha preached the great vehicle, a sutra named Immeasurable Meanings, and for the sake of the people in the midst of a great assembly he established broad distinctions. After the Buddha had finished preaching this sutra, he sat in the seat of the law, sitting cross-legged in the samadhi called the place of immeasurable meanings. The heavens rained down mandarava flowers, heavenly drums sounded of themselves, and the heavenly beings, dragons and spirits made offerings to the most honored of men. All of the Buddha lands immediately quaked and trembled greatly. The Buddha emitted a light from between his eyebrows, manifesting signs that are rarely seen. This light illumined the eastern direction, 18,000 Buddha lands, showing how all living beings there are recompensed in birth and death for their past deeds. That one could see how these Buddha lands, adorned with numerous wonderful hues of lapis lazuli and crystal, was due to the illumination of the Buddha's light. One could also see heavenly and human beings, dragons, spirits, many yakshas, gandharvas, and kimnaras, each making offerings to his respective Buddha. One could also see thus come ones naturally attaining the Buddha way, their bodies the color of golden mountains, upright, imposing, very subtle and wonderful. It was as though in the midst of pure lapis lazuli there should appear statues of real gold. In the midst of the great assembly, the world-honored ones expound the principles of the profound law. In one after another of the Buddha lands, the voice-hearers and countless multitudes, through the illumination of the Buddha's light, all became visible with their great assemblies. There were also monks residing in the midst of forests, exerting themselves in keeping the pure precepts as though they were guarding a bright jewel. One could also see bodhisattvas carrying out almsgiving, forbearance, and so forth, their numbers like Ganges sands, due to the illumination of the Buddha's light. One could also see bodhisattvas entering deeply into meditation practices, their bodies and minds still and unmoving, and in that manner seeking the Buddha way. One could also see bodhisattva who knew that phenomena are marked by tranquility and extinction, each in his respective land preaching the law and seeking the way. At that time, the four kinds of believers, seeing the Buddha, sun, moon, bright, manifest his great transcendental powers, all rejoiced in their hearts, and each one asked his neighbor what had caused these events. The one honored by heavenly and human beings just then arose from his samadhi and praised Bodhisattva wonderfully bright, saying, "You are the eyes of the world, one whom all can take faith in and believe, able to honor and uphold the storehouse of the Dharma. The law that I preach, you alone know how to testify to it." The world-honored one, having bestowed this praise, causing wonderfully bright to rejoice, preached the lotus for fully 60 small kalpas. He never rose from his seat. And the supreme and wonderful law that he preached was accepted and upheld in its entirety by the Dharma teacher, wonderfully bright. After the Buddha had preached the lotus, causing all the assembly to rejoice, on that very same day he announced to the assembly of heavenly and human beings, "I have already expounded for you the meaning of the true entity of all phenomena. Now when midnight comes, I will enter nirvana. You must strive with all your hearts and remove yourselves from indulgence and laxity. It is very difficult to encounter a Buddha. You meet one once in a million kalpas." When the children of the world-honored one heard that the Buddha was to enter nirvana, each one was filled with sorrow and distress, wondering why the Buddha should so quickly seek extinction. The sage lord, king of the law, comforted and reassured the countless multitude, saying, "When I enter extinction, you must not be concerned or fearful. This bodhisattva virtue storehouse has already understood in his mind the true entity that is without outflows. He will be the next to become a Buddha, bearing the name Pure Body, and he too will save immeasurable multitudes." That night the Buddha entered extinction as a fire dies out when the firewood is exhausted. They divided and apportioned his relics, and built immeasurable numbers of towers. And the monks and nuns, whose number was like Ganges sands, redoubled their exertions, thereby seeking the unsurpassed way. The Dharma teacher, wonderfully bright, honored and upheld the Buddha's storehouse of Dharma throughout 80 small kalpas, broadly propagating the Lotus Sutra. The 8 princely sons whom wonderfully bright converted held firmly to the unsurpassed way, and were thus able to meet with innumerable Buddhas. They made offerings to these Buddhas and followed them in practicing the great way, carrying out all the 6 paramitas. And were thus able to encounter innumerable Buddhas. And after they had made offerings to these Buddhas, they followed them in practicing the great way, and one after the other succeeded in becoming a Buddha, each in turn bestowing a prophecy on his successor. The last one to become a heavenly being among heavenly beings was named Buddha Burning Torch. As leader and teacher of seers, he saved immeasurable multitudes. This Dharma teacher, wonderfully bright, at that time had a disciple. This Dharma teacher, wonderfully bright, at that time had a disciple, whose mind was forever occupied with laziness and sloth, who was greedy for fame and profit, who sought fame and profit insatiably, often amusing himself amongst clansmen and those of other surnames. He threw away what he had studied and memorized, neglected and forgot it, failed to understand it. Because of this he was named Seeker of Fame. But he had also carried out many good actions, and was thus able to meet with innumerable Buddhas. He made offerings to these Buddhas and followed them in practicing the great way, carrying out all the 6 paramitas. And now he has met with the lion of the Shakyas. Hereafter he will become a Buddha, whose name will be Maitreya, who will save living beings extensively, in numbers beyond calculation. After that Buddha passed into extinction, that lazy and slothful one, he was you. And the Dharma teacher, wonderfully bright, that was the person who is now I myself. I saw how the Buddha, torch bright, sun moon bright, earlier manifested an auspicious portent like this. And so now I know that this present Buddha is about to preach the Lotus Sutra. The signs now are like those of the earlier auspicious portent. This is an expedient means used by the Buddhas. Now when the Buddha emits this beam of brightness, he is helping to reveal the meaning of the true entity of phenomena. Human beings now will come to know it. Let us press our palms together and wait with a single mind. The Buddha will rain down the rain of the law to fully satisfy all seekers of the way. You who seek the three vehicles, if you have doubts and regrets, the Buddha will resolve them for you, bringing them to an end, so that nothing remains. May all merit and virtue from this activity adorn the Buddha's Pure Lands, repaying the four kinds of kindness from above and aiding those suffering in the paths below. May all of those who see and hear of this bring forth the resolve for enlightenment, and when this retribution body is over, be reborn together in ultimate bliss. Honor to Fundamental Teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. Honor to Fundamental Teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. Honor to Fundamental Teacher Shakyamuni Buddha.